Recently, we had Stuart Weitzman on the show, who produced a documentary about Jews in Broadway. And he said something like 97% of all Broadway productions have had a Jewish writer or composer. Like, what is that about? Why is it such a Jewish art form?
Let's go back to the 20s. You know, what is it that makes the Yiddish theater happen? Why that? You know, there are other theatrical traditions. There are African theatrical traditions. There are, you know, Viennese theatrical traditions. There's something about what happens when you look at, you know, Yiddish theater and what it meant to the community, the way that we expressed ourselves through theater. That was an important way to express ourselves. That was, you know, we're storytellers. To be storytellers that way, to embody those stories so that we gather a whole bunch of people, we sit them down in seats and we say, this is your story, and we tell it. And there are Asian theater traditions, obviously. There's, you know, British theater traditions,
Sure.
There's all of that. But when you look at the Yiddish theater, which is kind of an amalgam of a couple of different Western and Eastern European traditions all sort of munched on top of each other, it doesn't look different than a Broadway show. Mm. And so I think you think about how those people on Second Avenue in those theaters eventually became the people who moved uptown to these Broadway theaters, and they are the DNA of what musical theater, commercial musical theater is, because it came from there. You know, that was sort of what and when I talked earlier about sort of how we get whitewashed out of it, I think ultimately anything that makes a lot of money is going to be co-opted by the, you know, by the larger culture.
Right.
And, you know, I think Broadway musicals have been and are being even more sort of co-opted by the larger culture because they can make a lot of money. But I think for a very long time, it was this wonderful little niche that the reason that 97, I mean, I don't know if it's 97%, but who am I to argue with Stuart Weitzman? But if it's 90%, the reason is because we just knew the rules better, because we made the game. Mm-hmm. And now it's been, 100 years and other people are learning the rules or changing the rules or doing it or understanding it. But it was our game for a long time. It was our vocabulary. And so that's my best guess. So I know you were saying don't put it in a historical context, but for me, it makes sense in a historical context because this is the way our people have always told stories and communicated.
Your love of Judaism and its music, not just of a narrative style, but also you've written something called the Hanukkah Suite, which is sort of a Broadway classical choral combo of all existing Hanukkah music, which is notoriously not great music. You made it sound a lot better. And then you also wrote the Manischewitz merengue, which is, Dayenu to a merengue beat.
Well, yeah, I used to do these shows at Subculture for 6 years. I was in residence and I did a show every month at Subculture. And so sometimes those would coincide with certain holidays. And Lindsay Mendez and I were doing the show that month. And it was on, I think, the second night of the Seder. That just had been the night that I chose. And I haven't done a second night of a Seder in years. I used to do them when I was a kid, but I did my first night. And then the second night was the concert. But so I said, well, we should acknowledge the night. And so I had a huge horn section and all of that. And I said, well, we should all sing Diana. So I wrote it. And then I, passed around a bottle of Manischewitz. Yeah. This was before COVID. And and that was it. I will say that was probably my most Jewish night at Subculture.
Yeah, the whole audience is singing Diana with you.
Yeah, no. That was definitely a night where you knew who I was.
Do you see yourself as the like primary Jewish mainstream composer of today? Because you kind of are.
I mean, I think Bill Finn was certainly more observant than I was.
It doesn't matter. He's not writing Hanukkah Suites and Manischewitz.
Look, falsettos is pretty Jewy.
I don't know. You got a lot more under your belt.
None of it was by design. Like, I never was like, I'm here to represent the Jewish people.
Right.
I don't have any wish to be contrarian about it. I like it. I wish I were a more observant Jew if I was going to be thought of as the Jewish writer. Like, I don't think I kind of have the right to claim that just because on a daily basis I'm very aware of being Jewish, but I'm not observant. And I think to separate Judaism culturally from Judaism as a religion, I think is totally fair in society, but I really am separated. I really am a culturally Jewish, and I totally buy that, but I'm not religiously Jewish.
I mean, that is the basis for a lot of what this show is exploring the different ways that people identify and connect as Jewish. And I will say, you know, from sitting over here, I would take somebody who doesn't observe a single law and puts as much Jewish, you know, joy and pride out into the artistic world as you do any day over some Orthodox Jew who's not creating the things you're creating.
Right. But I mean, again, what I was raised with is that those rules are there for a reason. And so to not observe any of the rules is to sort of not be Jewish. And I think being an American Jew is very much about having that dichotomy be present.
Sure.
And I think if you ask me what being Jewish is to American Jews, the values, what are American Jewish values? I think there is something to that amount of nuance and empathy, that sense that things can be both one thing and also the other.